Cool. So while we're getting started, we'll give a little bit of time for some folks to dial in. And Spang, I had a question for you just to kick this off today. And I'll actually stop sharing my screen for a second because it's our two heads talking, our two heads illustrated on a slide. We can stop that one for just a second. I just want to chat with you about something that's been on my mind this morning, which was so our CMO had sent out to the marketing team these little boxes that kind of had some little goodies in them for the holidays. And so our CMO, Jyoti Swarup, and we could kind of pick which box we wanted. So I saw one of those little goodie boxes that had this book. The title is "Do One Thing Every Day That Makes You Happy." And just kind of thinking through, I mean, just like what a tough winter it has been in a lot of ways for people. It's been yet another winter where we couldn't do as much as we might normally want to, and that kind of thing, just a lot to deal with. So kind of thinking through like just little things we can do to make ourselves happy. And I got curious, like, what are things that you do throughout the week to make yourself happy?
Yeah, for sure. That's so funny that Dorothy sent you that book. I feel like I learned something new about Dorothy. He's got like a secret cute side. But I think that one of the things that's been very prominent for me recently is so I actually recently last fall became a homeowner, and this is like kicked in my nesting instincts like in a way in which I had not predicted, I would say. And I think what's been making me happy a lot lately is getting into plants. So I just feel like I have been very inspired to like make the space my own in a way that like when I was a renter, I just for some reason I didn't really feel that same way. And so there's a greenhouse like in my neighborhood, just not too far away. It's a super cool place, and I just like walked over there one weekend and I was looking for like one plant for like a specific corner in my living room, and I actually ended up coming home with like 5 plants. I like tried a bunch of different ones out, and I was, chatting with the folks over there, and I was like, maybe I'll just get them all. So I got a bunch of plants, and I, for the record, have maybe never actually kept a houseplant before and knew nothing about houseplants. So, I would say that the things that have been making me happy have been both one plants. I got this desk plant actually.
All right, let's do
this in this corner. Here we go.
Desk plant dance off. This is mine.
Oh, nice. I think it's kind of funny that we have like both these like secret desk plants that are like just out of view. But like I didn't really plan to be able to grab my desk plant and have a desk plant cameo, but I would say that I've been checking on my plants every day, and there's a bunch of things that make me happy. I think that like one is that, especially for folks that like live in an urban environment, like the urban environment is very like squares and boxes and grays and like human-made things. I feel like they lack like a external complexity to them, like a house. You can make things complex, like art can be complex, or if you like put ornate things on things, but like the sort of randomness and complexity seen in nature is, I think, like soothing to the brain in a way that like all of the sort of angles in even architecture and things like that are not. So just sort of communing with my plants and checking on them. And I've been like fussing about like the water and the light and stuff like that. And this plant, actually, this money tree, I originally, I found out that a lot of houseplants really don't actually like direct sunlight, and they can burn the leaves. So I burned my money tree's leaves, and then I had to figure out that I needed to make sure my shades are half open so it gets like the filtered light, like it's in the base sort of undergrowth of a tropical canopy forest, because a lot of houseplants are like tropical plants that grow in the rainforest but like underneath the canopy, which I had no idea before. So I would summarize that like a relevant thing for me that's making me happy is like communing with urban nature, learning about a new thing, and I guess caretaking.
Oh, that's such a good one. Yeah. It's just a minor note about like why I have another secret desk plant sitting next to my bamboo, but I didn't want to let them go total battle of the
The
plants.
Ash desk plant show, man. Now I feel jealous. I want two
Yeah.
desk plants.
Well, the
I'm just
reason
gonna go
why.
over to that greenhouse and buy another plant right now.
Well, guess what? I have so I happen to be married to a Ikebana floral designer, and that is why our house is full of plants. But that sort of it's I love that note on like the asymmetry of things, the asymmetry of nature, the randomness of nature. There is a refreshing thing about that, and certainly living here in New York City, it is, as you described, all boxes and squares and man-made objects. So what a really cool way to start off. Thanks for sharing your plant. Take care of your money tree, because
yeah, that feng shui, it like brings luck or something.
Oh yeah.
Actually feel kind of weird about having a money tree in my office because it makes me sound like just the fact that it's called a money tree and I'm like working here. It's like not really the vibe that I usually have, but I literally just went to the greenhouse and described the light situation in this room, and they're like, "What about this one?" So I knew nothing. Don't blame me.
Well, cool. So I think we'll just really fun way to start off our first hang with Spang of the year. Thanks for sharing. And one thing that we'll kind of do here is jump into the kind of the meat of our conversation today. And if you'll, one of the things that I think brought up last time was this this blog post that you and our CEO Gleb put together on predictions for 2022. So in some ways, we're a month into 2022, so it's an interesting point in time to get the check. But also for Nylas, our 2022 just started about a week or so ago. So it's an interesting chance early in the year to kind of talk about a few of those topics that were on your mind. So before we jump right into those predictions, I'll just kind of run through our slide. This is us, but in illustrated form. Thank you everyone for joining. Let's see here. Nice. Okay, so cool. I thought I would just take a brief moment to introduce ourselves. So Spang, I'll let you go ahead and start.
Cool. Well, hey everybody, my name is Christine Spang. I'm the founder and CTO here at Nylas. I started the company about 8.5 years ago, which is sort of mind-blowing to think about. And I've done a lot of things at the company, everything from building the product in the early days to at various points I've managed the engineering team. And now I'm doing a lot that's related to our customers and also obviously the future of the company and thinking about, where should we be going? Because there's a lot of people here now and we're creating the future. So it's part of my job to think about what that future should be.
Awesome, thank you. And my name is Ash. I've joined Nylas now. I've been around for just over 2 months, and I lead developer relations. And so developer relations is here to excite and empower and inspire developers who are building on Nylas to do really cool things. So I like to use this opportunity to plug that DevRel is hiring. We've got 2 more open roles for developer advocates at senior level or above. And if anyone's out there who's interested in helping developers do awesome stuff on a great platform, definitely hit us up. My DMs on Twitter are open, but you're welcome to reach out through LinkedIn or whatever else. Happy to tell you anything about our team and the company and what it will be like to be a developer advocate for Nylas. A couple of notes now that we're getting started here. I'm guessing Zoom already mentioned this, but the webinar is being recorded and will be made available to watch after the live session. And there's a Q&A function in the app. We want to hear from you. So throw out some questions. We have Daniela directly in the chat. And then I'll also be looking at some of those questions and reading those out later on so we can talk about them. So today's Agenda overview is diving into 2022 predictions and trends. And so we got this like really awesome blog post that I think we can provide a link to as well that covers both Spang's and Gleb's different predictions on the year. And what we've done today is really kind of pick 3 different topics that we thought were particularly interesting for us to chat about. So we're gonna kick off by talking about some tech trends in comms fragmentation, then go into no code, low code, and then finally automation before we close out today. So I'll dive right in. Lifting directly from that blog post, I'll show you the challenge. We'll talk, and then I'll show you Spang's prediction, and then we'll get some kind of different detail and thoughts from directly from Spang. So prediction number 1, solving channel fragmentation becomes a top priority. So modern communication doesn't happen in 1, 2, or even 3 communication channels. It happens across numerous channels, sometimes all within the context of a single conversation. Critical data now lives in multiple email providers and numerous chat and messaging apps. And building integrations into all of these applications requires time and effort from engineering teams that could be spent elsewhere. So Spang, this was your prediction. Facing channel fragmentation head on will be a top priority in 2022, as engineering teams will look to create a faster and more streamlined process for leveraging all the modern communication channels without having to dedicate countless time and resources to build and maintain them. So this one here is like we've got a lot of words that we just got through, but I think it lays out nicely the challenge as well as the prediction, and we'll kind of pick this apart a little bit. I thought I'd start out, Spang, by just, can we start by just illustrating this challenge a little more? Like what does this actually mean day to day for teams? What does it look like in companies?
Yeah, for sure. Obviously throughout the years of building Nylas, we've heard a lot of feedback from developers about, the challenges of integrating with communication channels. And I think it's helpful to kind of just touch on, a few things that are the challenges, even with, sort of the main channels that have existed up until now. For example, if you think about connecting to email, email might look like or sound like, one specific channel, but behind the scenes there's actually quite a lot of complexity and fragmentation even within that one channel. You have all of these different providers out there to access the data. There's actually many different protocols that you have to integrate with. The data models are not the same. They're mostly the same, but in order to just, for example, build a connection from just general email accounts to an app, you have to essentially reconcile the data models across different providers so that your app can, essentially, have a representation of the data that you care about and then process it. Probably if you're trying to get, some insights out of the communication data, you don't want to have like an entirely different program for whether that data is coming from Microsoft or from Google. So that's just an example within email providers. And then I think that especially when we've sort of focused more on real-time communication, I think that the complexity is even today just exploding in terms of the numbers of different channels that people are using out there. It's like, well, if we're doing real-time chat, well, if you're in a business, you're probably using, Slack or Microsoft Teams. But for kind of consumer communication, it's WhatsApp or Facebook Messenger or WeChat or SMS. There's still a lot of communication that goes through SMS. So when we think about kind of the challenge for businesses, typically the business logic and the thing that people want to get done is actually channel agnostic. They just want to reach people where they are and get the communication data from wherever it is. So that the thing that people are actually trying to build is basically agnostic to where that communication comes from or where it's going to actually end up, in front of a user or customer. So, I think the core sort of source of this pressure is the fact that people want to, write that application once and then just have it, connect to what people are using and where the data comes from. So, that's where solutions like Nylas come into play, where, we go out and figure out, what's the difference between all the data models? Like, how do we often connect to these different APIs? What are the differences between rate limiting, error messages, back off, retries, all that kind of devils in the details type things of connecting to these different providers, so that folks can focus on that business logic piece of what is their app actually trying to do. So that would be generally my take on it.
Yeah, cool. What a great way to kind of lay it out there. And again, like as you're describing that, like I'm just imagining like all these different points, and kind of I go up because a lot of these are somewhere in someone's cloud and or on someone's service, and all this data preferably is coming together. But if you try to bring it straight into your app, again, like negotiating off and again like rate limits and all those.
And even if something's super simple or not that complex, each API still has a learning curve to it. The conventions are not exactly the same. There's patterns that people typically use. For example, if people are building a REST type API, well, there's a lot of similarities between folks that are using best practices, but there's always differences between different APIs. And I think that I always come back to this fact that software is quote unquote information technology. And the complexity comes from the differences in how do we talk to different information sources and how do we interoperate between those. So, even if it's not a huge lift to integrate with any one specific provider, the fact that there's so many different ones, it all adds up in the end. So that's why we, as engineers, have created different abstraction layers so that we can try not to think about all the things that if you thought about everyone individually would just become overwhelming.
Yeah, and certainly even, within single sort of providers themselves, sometimes we find that there are differences depending on what API you're working with or what sort of flavor of the same service that you're trying to work with. So on the data front itself, I'm curious, where the challenge is to bring all of this stuff and kind of have like a way to, make sense of all of it. What is it like? What are teams looking for in terms of like insights out of that data or kind of goals that they're hoping to achieve by being able to learn more about their communications data?
Yeah, for sure. It's lots of different things. And I think, the big picture here is that we're moving more and more every day towards a world where humans and computers work together to be more effective. Like on its own, a computer can't do everything a human can do. But there are things that computers are better at doing than humans are. And I think of it as being this, virtuous partnership where technology can enable humans to be able to accomplish the things that they're trying to accomplish faster and more effectively, to get more done, to be a lever. So, the kinds of insights that people are looking for, obviously it depends on sort of, a lot of different things. Context always matters, but I think one of the biggest things is insight into, what actions might be relevant to, move a conversation forward. For example, we have, a lot of folks who are essentially like, building tools to help people, manage some sort of, business that's centered around customers better. And all these people have the question of, what actions can I be doing to, to nurture those customer relationships? And there's tons of data in the messages people are sending. And there's also kind of workflows that people have that are things that, have relatively specific sort of stages. And you're kind of like working, a customer through a stage, whether that's a sales pipeline or a recruiting candidate going through, like an interview process. All of these things are essentially workflows. And, the difference between working with a recruiting candidate, for example, and doing everything manually of, get a candidate into a system with their resume, extract like the email from their resume, reach out to them, schedule a time to chat, remind those folks that their interview is coming up. All of those actions are essentially like pieces of a workflow that computing is actually like really well equipped to surface those up, and in some cases even do them automatically. Mm-hmm. So that's one example. And then I think that like, another piece of just like insights that people are looking for. And I see this especially when people are working with, especially working with email, because, if you think about kind of the history of email, like email is basically like people sending web pages to each other. It's an HTML doc. It can be a plain text doc, but these days, typically it's HTML, and there are all different types of documents in there. And HTML can be anything. There's not like an object defined for, when I receive a receipt from someone in email. It's just, a web page that someone designed. So, one set of kind of insights is the fact that like a lot of communication data is pretty unstructured, and how can we sort of pull out useful things that should be connected to workflows or connected to other computer systems in a way that, is useful to computers, which is not like a giant chunk of HTML. It's like a JSON object with, a defined data model that can then be easily connected to other systems. So, a lot of folks that we work with are also just trying to extract and transform that communication data into something actionable. Or it might even be things like sentiment, or like categorizing, like, for example, if you're doing customer support across a large, number of customers, you might, want to get data around like what are the kinds of things that people are asking for. And, there's a lot of innovation that's happening in terms of being able to do that stuff in a more like machine assisted way versus like just brute force labor of having someone look at things and, type things into a computer.
Awesome. So like as a final thought here then, on this particular prediction, what does this look like? How does it unfold across the rest of the year? Is there anything in particular? I mean, this, the prediction here says that facing this channel fragmentation will be head on, will be a top priority. So how is that going to manifest itself in companies?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think that overall kind of, the way things manifest is that, people look to vendors and providers to help them bridge that gap of the complexity. And it's not just folks like Nylas out there. There's plenty of other, companies that are helping essentially deal with the fact that we're having this explosion of SaaS. Like I even have, in running Nylas as a company, we have SaaS that helps us like onboard everyone to all the SaaS that we use as a part of onboarding. So it's interesting to think that like this channel fragmentation is also kind of just like software fragmentation, in that the more software we've built as a society to help us do things, the more that we need to integrate those things together and, sort of make them all work together well. So I think that's like a challenge in terms of like, we're essentially using meta tools to accomplish that in different ways.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's interesting that, we use some of those tools ourselves, yet we also work on solving some of these meta problems. But yeah, I think this is a really exciting one to keep an eye on across the year. I know Nylas is going to have some really awesome stuff in store for solving channel fragmentation. So moving on, I want to move to our next prediction, which is this one. With an engineering labor shortage, low-code development takes off. So the challenge here is that businesses are facing increased pressure to rapidly build and deploy products and features that drive ROI and stay ahead of their competitors. At the same time, competition for hiring skilled software engineers has never been higher. And the prediction is, as a result of all of this, we'll see the adoption of low-code, no-code tools, and applications accelerate in 2022 and beyond. Through the use of low-code tools and workflows, businesses will be able to meet market and customer needs faster by building out products and features faster, and do so without compromising on quality or reliability. So again, I want to just kind of pause on the challenge here for a second. We're talking about an engineering labor shortage. So my understanding is that, you know, there's more developers on the planet now than there ever have been. So what's the shortage all about? What's driving that?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, responding to the point about there being more developers than there ever have been, that's true. But surprisingly enough, we're still kind of in the early innings of digitizing work and using the full power of computing to make essentially managing like a worldwide complex society at scale work better. So I think kind of one of the short answers there is that, yes, there's more than ever before, but the pie is very large, and there's still a ton more that we can do to harness the power of computing to make humans more productive, essentially. So in terms of kind of this like low code, no code, and how we have this like tension essentially between demand from companies for software engineers, a desire to automate to make people more productive by essentially harnessing the power of computers to help those people get more done by essentially giving them leverage. I think the whole idea behind low code, no code is like, can we take that concept of using computers as leverage and allow people that have less specialized training to be able to do it? So this is people like folks that are in specific domains that are trying to get things done that can be helped by having specific tools to do that. One example that comes immediately to mind is in, for example, customer success in companies these days. A customer success organization, their goal essentially is to make customers happy, successful with the product, and to accomplish their goals with the products that they've bought. A lot of what happens there is there needs to be targeted communication to specific customers when they take certain actions, or there's observations about the usage that they're doing for a product. And behind the scenes, all of that is things that can be assisted programmatically. So, I think that one thing that I've been seeing a lot more of is kind of folks building out essentially like visual workflow builders that, take common things and allow people to essentially as if they were programming, do conditionals, trigger actions based off of some action happening before, and abstract away the logic around retries, back off, and error handling, and all of the things that if you were building the code from scratch, you would have to do, and that takes quite a lot of specialized training still. But as a side note, I do think that we're living in a world where eventually some degree of sort of like programming ability is going to be basically like reading and writing in the future. If you don't know some basics about how to interact with code, it's already the case that kids that go to school today, they're becoming essentially like code natives. Where people just sort of have this baked in knowledge of how conditionals and automation kind of works and when you should be using that kind of thing to be more effective. So I see like low code, no code is kind of like bridging this gap between training and specialization to be able to write software using just like an actual programming language. And I think that there's an interesting sort of bridge here where so you actually shared this cool article the other day about like what was called like laddering in APIs.
Oh, yes.
And one thing that I think is an interesting prediction for the future is that the downside of these like low code, no code tools is that they're constrained in the problems that you can solve with them. And I think that they allow people to solve a lot of problems, but we haven't quite gotten to a world where there's like great sort of bridging from that low code, no code world to like what happens when I'm running up against the constraints of the tool. So I'm super excited to see like low code, no code tools that like generate code behind the scenes and will like give you code that you can run on like a serverless environment in the future when you run into those constraints, and sort of bridge that gap onto being more extensible in what you can do with the solution.
Yeah, I love that idea. And, thinking through, for example, in design, like I think in OS design, for example, like operating system design, there's this notion of like progressive disclosure where like you don't need to know a lot to get started for some systems, but there's a great deal of depth that you can go to if you want. And I think like, for example, like a lot of operating systems have a menu bar of some sort, and you can use your mouse, go up there and drag and find the item you want. But eventually you're probably going to learn keyboard shortcuts just to go faster. And that's what feels like a basic example today, but really wasn't a long time ago. This notion of progressive disclosure on an API platform is one that, like you said, I think sometimes there are like different entries of different levels of complexity, but there's not really a path from one to the other. So I think that's actually something that I'm really looking forward to seeing over time is how that plays out. How do we, when people hit the edge of that low code, no code solution, how do they eject into something that is, more at the code level and gives them more control when they're ready for that?
Yeah, like one of the huge innovations of graphical user interfaces is making what you can do discoverable without having to go and read the manual first. And so these low code the low code, no code tools are great, even for folks that know how to code, because you can do things that are made easy by that tool without, having to go Google, like, how do I, whatever, the things you look up on Stack Overflow. And so, even for folks that have that capability, these are really useful and really helpful. But then the question is like, what happens when all the discoverable things are not the thing that you want to do? And how do we get to like the advanced mode CLI power user type thing?
Absolutely. Yeah. I can't wait for that. I've certainly low code tools. I've played around with a number of them over many years, and I get excited about it until I hit that wall. And then it's like, all right, now we're going to go write a bash script or some JavaScript or something else to start automating that. But there's no really, you don't get aided in that process. I'm curious too. So do you, for example, sometimes when it comes to like companies evaluating a product that they're looking at adopting or a solution, extensibility is going to be a key feature that a lot of folks are looking for. Certainly I've been like that before, and I'm looking at something and, one of my baseline sort of boxes to check is, does this thing have an API so I can take it to the next level? Do you think that low code, no code is going to be like that in products now, where customers and enterprises looking at these solutions are going to expect that to be a part of the offering?
That's a good question. I think it really depends on who the audience is. I mean, like, it's a question of like resource deployment, right? Like if your goal is to say you're a large company, one of the things that you have to think about is like training costs for adopting a tool within your organization. So I can really see having that low code, no code as being a huge pro to an organization that is really worried about, how much training cost is there going to be to get adoption to this thing. I don't know that it would be something that is like a complete deal breaker requirement, but it's definitely something that makes a huge difference for adoption.
Cool. So on this low code, no code topic, are any final thoughts before we jump onto our third prediction, which I expect is actually somewhat related, but particularly on when it comes to no code, low code? Any final thoughts here?
I'm excited to see where people take it.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that I always kind of go back to when the phrase is mentioned, maybe we talked about this before, but that there was like this visual programming language from MIT called Sketch, I believe it was, where you could really use
Scratch.
Scratch. That's
Yeah.
it.
I was thinking earlier about, I think a lot of this draws some inspiration from kind of educational programming languages, like Scratch, or even kind of like logo type stuff where, the language is made simpler, but still has all the basic concepts. And we're almost creating like visual DSLs for, certain problem domains. And now the question is like, okay, but if I run into the constraints of this DSL, can I just write Ruby code? That kind of thing.
Yeah, that's really fascinating when you put it in the concept of DSL, which is, I believe, domain specific language for folks that don't know the acronym, but it may be interesting to see if there's ever this sort of meta sort of best practice on how to design your no code, low code tools so that people aren't now relearning different visual DSLs, if you will, for each product that they have. I guess we're not there yet, but if this trend takes off, you can imagine how difficult it might be jumping from one thing to another, and things are done just slightly differently, or the words used are different from product to product.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's kind of like how when just graphical user interfaces developed, that, we slowly over time developed just common sort of affordances, like a right click does this, left click does this. If you like click and drag, it does this. And certain keys have certain meanings. So I wouldn't be surprised if with these like visual workflow builders, they're over time develops like a common sort of shared way in which just people understand that will meet people's expectations and help them be easier to learn. It's even the same way with like REST APIs. If you use the REST verbs in a way that makes sense to people, like, you shouldn't have like a GET request modify things on the back end that would drastically violate people's expectations. And so all of that contributes to learnability. And I definitely think that there's likely to be patterns that develop like that when it comes to these low code, no code UIs as well.
Maybe we've just made the case for yet another standard for something.
Well, the thing is, you don't have to necessarily define a standard for something. I mean, I guess with the case with, REST verbs, that is one thing that was defined via standard. But some of these things just develop organically, where, you're not violating some standard to do something different, but if it confuses all of your users, why would you do that? So it's kind of one of those things where the way that the winner is just how everybody does it.
Awesome. So I want to move this into our final prediction of the day, which I think is somewhat related, and that'll be one of my first questions to you here on this next one, is kind of teasing apart this particular prediction. So keep this one in the back of your mind, no code, low code, versus our next topic, which is going to be workflow automation. So I'll read this out. Workflow automation goes company-wide. The challenge is that up until now, some departments have embraced AI and automation more than others. For example, customer-facing teams such as sales and marketing have typically leveraged AI to connect disparate data and create intelligent workflows that empower team members to work smarter and more productively. So our prediction here, our final one. Heading into 2022 and beyond, we will see workflow automation extend across the entire company. This means HR and people teams can be faster and more efficient in scheduling interviews and updating candidate profiles. Finance can automatically update payment records, and customer success teams can be better equipped to respond quickly and efficiently to customer needs.
Yeah, for sure. I mean,
So can we disambiguate this one from the previous one? I'm curious. I'm sure there's some overlap here. So are these kind of flavors of the same trend, or is there something particularly distinct about automation itself?
yeah, I mean, I think automation, the word can have like pretty broad meanings, but workflow automation is super related to what we were talking about before, with just essentially computing and computing tools, helping do a lot of the sort of not so interesting work behind the scenes to make those workflows easier to do. So I wouldn't say that these are completely separate. I think automation can also be something that's like completely happening within an engineering organization where, the spec is like, we need to make sure that all of the customer data that comes in gets connected to the finance systems and, filed correctly in Salesforce to kick off whatever. So automation to me doesn't imply low code, no code, but low code, no code does allow some automation, if that makes sense.
It absolutely does. I mean, this may be an oversimplification, but I almost think that there's like a broad category of things called automation, and no code, low code can be one of those kind of things.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So how does this start to play out in the real world then? We have in this background this engineering shortage that we've talked about, but it also sounds like we're working on, as a planet, automating more workflows for HR and finance and so on, the teams that typically aren't getting the benefits of that, where perhaps engineering teams are. So where is this work happening?
Yeah, for sure. And I think that beside the fact that, like, for example, software is being more and more widely deployed, there's also just more people than ever before. And we're connected in ways in which, hundreds of years ago, we weren't connected in such an interconnected way that we are today through the internet. I can I can exchange money with people on the other side of the planet. I can talk to them in real time. And that's not something that was possible in many decades past. And that ability allows just like humans as a civilization to do things that we weren't really able to do before, and to work together on much bigger problems. So, and that got like a little galaxy brain on us, but
no, I'll take it. Like I was just, you had me thinking of voice over IP and where I was in my life. I was living abroad at that time, and it changed everything, absolutely everything about, just quality of life and convenience. So totally get that. Galaxy brains are welcome.
So I guess what I was trying to say is that like the problems that we're solving are also more complex than we were solving in the past, because we have a whole new possibility space that wasn't even possible before. So we have more demand to do this automation, and people in general are more empowered to automate things and have learned and sort of internalized this like concept of leverage. And that's just making people more productive in general.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I think that in terms of then kind of like taking these tools we're using to work with folks all around the world, and giving the benefit not only to the folks who know how to write the automations, but also bring it into other parts of the company. I mean, is there a particular, you've listed in this prediction a few areas where you think this is going to be particularly useful, including HR, and finance and customer success teams. Is this kind of a full list, or do you have like any kind of like destinations for this automation in mind where people are going to particularly benefit day to day in a work environment?
Totally. It's definitely not a full list, but I also think it's helpful to just dive a little more deeply into some of them. Like just the word scheduling doesn't necessarily sound like it involves automation, but it does, because if you think about it, scheduling, in the traditional way is like a very manual workflow where you go back and forth proposing different times that might be, mutually acceptable to the person, and there's different constraints to this workflow. There's time zones. There's what else is going on. There's how many people from your organization need to be at that meeting. Is it a fixed set of people? Is it pulling from a pool? Is it some sort of panel thing? There's a lot of different setups for different meetings. And so that scheduling process is a workflow. So having software that streamlines that process and makes it take up much less time is automation. So we have like all these words that I think under the hood just mean automation, that we don't necessarily identify as being automation on kind of like a surface glance. So streamlined scheduling, everybody needs that. It's a core human need. You need to meet with people and talk about things. Like we can do a lot of things async, but not everything. And sometimes you just gotta be face to face, whether that's in person or on a video call. And making that easy to happen is a very useful thing that saves people a lot of time. Like at the end of the day, automation is about saving time, because time is the most finite resource. If you go way back in history, kind of, the first automations that were really helpful were things like, having water pumped to a facility and to your home instead of having to spend 5 hours a day, like hiking to a place where you can fetch water so that you can have water to drink. Mm-hmm. So, and I do think it's worthwhile to just kind of connect it back to that at the end of the day, like any time that's saved by automations is time that's freed up for other things. And that's really what we mean by productivity at the end of the day. Like productivity is a super abstract concept. And like, I think productivity sort of, can be held up as something that like is sort of meaningless, as like a thing to strive for, to produce more. Well, to produce more for what end? Like, our goal is not just to produce more, but having time to do, more other things that, especially that people are better at than, the rote actions of going back and forth, more time to, focus on the emotional pieces of things, relationships, learning, just spending time with people you care about. This automation can cause us to work
things
less.
That make you happy.
Spending more time on doing things that make you happy. I think those are kind of, the things that at the end of the day, like, that's why we are automating things. It's to free up time, and that time, it's in a way priceless.
Yeah. Have you ever, we'll start to close out this last topic here. Have you ever used an automation tool that like occasionally like tells you how much time the tool itself has saved you?
I think so.
I've got a couple of those sometimes I don't stick to these as much as I'd like, but some where they'll just like automate some things on your desktop that are just like minor inconveniences here and there. But like, if you always know in certain contexts, like you need these windows open, like why do that every time when it could just be automated? But it's always fun to get that report, every week or month or whatever it is, saying like, we saved you 5 hours or we saved you 45 minutes or whatever it is. So in some ways it's interesting to think back to and look at that and say, I wonder how I used that 5 minutes of my life that I got back dragging around Windows.
Well, I think the interesting thing is that, we don't necessarily internalize that time saved as like translating directly to time saved, because it actually allows us to change our behavior and to do different things by the fact that accomplishing some other thing is now less expensive for us in terms of time.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe we don't have, 5 extra hours that are just sitting around every week, but we've used our days in a different way because, that time is sort of baked in everywhere. Or maybe we make different decisions about what to do because of how arduous they are. So, when it's much easier to find a time to meet with people, maybe we'll meet with people more often, and that kind of thing. So I think it's the interesting things are like, what are the second order and third order effects that come from automating things that at the end of the day aren't that interesting, to allow us to spend more time on the interesting things.
Very, very cool. What a great way to wrap up today. I think that we'll stop here today. We've talked about 3 different challenges and predictions that Spang shared in a blog post back in December. We talked about as companies wanting to work on solving communications, fragmentation, and also the advancement of low code, no code, as well as automation across 2022. We have another blog post. That full blog post has lots of predictions from both Spang and our CEO Gleb, and is definitely worth checking out. So we'll just say thank you, and I will, as a last moment here, I'm gonna share our illustrated heads one more. Look at that. I think it's yeah. So here we are. We just wanted to say thank you. Go follow Spang at Spang. That's easy enough. I think you post a lot of really cool stuff on there, Spang, about open source, and I feel like I've seen some Linux stuff go by and lots of just like high level thoughts.
Nerd stuff.
Some
combination of nerd stuff and startups.
Cool. I'm a little more nonsensical when I'm on, but I'm Ash. You can follow me at AshRyan_IO. And again, when it comes to all these different trends we've been talking about, Nylas is going to have some really interesting stuff. Well, we already do, but we're going to have even more interesting stuff on the horizon, I think. So be sure to go check us out. You can go to dashboard.nylas.com/register and get a free trial. So thank you very much for joining us, whether you joined us live today. Thanks for making the time. And if you're watching us in the future, what's that like? Awesome. I hope the future is great, and we're looking forward to getting there with you. So I'll say goodbye to you, Spang, and goodbye to everyone else.
Thanks for tuning in, everybody. Have a great day.